Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining today's IC Real-Time webinar. In today's webinar, we will be discussing our thermal hybrid cameras. Our thermal hybrid cameras are dual lens hybrid cameras that give you the ability to see both thermal imaging along with your normal CMOS-based imaging. I have muted everyone's microphone, but I will take any questions anyone might have at the end of the webinar. My name is Michael Caballero. I'm one of the national sales executives here at IC Real-Time, and let's get started. So like I mentioned, we're going to be talking about thermal imaging and what is thermal imaging. So where regular cameras can see visible light, thermal cameras see invisible infrared heat emissions and then separate the readings into colors that indicate relative temperatures. So our thermal hybrid cameras combine full HD 1080p imagery with thermal infrared heat signatures in one compact device to offer the best of both worlds. Now we offer this in both a PTZ and a bullet as well. So why thermal security cameras? Because they can detect things like air and heat leakage. They can detect perishable food, production process supervision, machine overheat prevention, poultry and dairy barns, as well as well and pump house monitors and rooftop cooling towers and fans. So thermal cameras see heat energy like a standard camera sees visible light. So you can utilize these in commercial equipment for process monitoring, plant security and fire safety, agricultural and food processing, and medical and vaccine cold storage. So like I said, these are going to be dual lens cameras in both a PTZ and a bullet design. So this, on your standard image side, it's a typical CMOS sensor that converts captured visible light into voltage and signal, then encode and compress that signal for video output. So just like your standard video cameras that you've come to expect, you have that CMOS sensor side. Now, do keep in mind this does take up 2 channels. It is a single cable run back to a switch, but it does occupy 2 channels as well. Now, on the other side, you have your VOX uncooled microbolometer thermal sensor. So this is for your infrared heat signatures, change the electrical resistance of the VOX sensors. These change signals are processed for thermal video output. So again, you have your dual side, you'll have your single channel that's going to give you your thermal imaging, and then you have your second channel that's going to give you your standard imaging. So flexible alerts and alarms. So what this does is this gives you the ability to have alerts on specific temperatures and temperature either reductions or increases. Now with that, you can specify monitoring an entire scene. So the entire scene of the thermal image. You'll also have the ability to create what you would know as intrusion zones, if you know anything about our IVS rules, and then specify only a specific area in that scene to monitor your temperature increases or your decreases. With that, you'll have an on-camera spotlight and speaker alerts, your high and low temperature alerts like I discussed, and like I mentioned, your adjustable coverage zones. You'll have that ability to take snapshots from that, digital thermal recording. So you're going to record in both in your standard imaging and your thermal imaging as well. And it'll allow you to then issue email alerts, but more importantly, your push notifications. Do keep in mind your push alerts can only happen with our ICRSS Pro app, so you won't be able to have that capability with the IC View app. And you'll also have external alarm leads that can come right off the camera, or you can actually pull right from the recorder itself. So we also have different thermal imaging colorways here. So as you see here, we have our rain, we have our color 2, our iron bow 1, fusion, iron bow 2, glow blow, and then white hot, amongst others. Now, something to keep in mind with that is the reason you have these different colors is you may have somebody who is colorblind to specific colors. We have quite a bit of people who are colorblind, so at least you have the ability to adjust those colorways to adapt to a person who does have a color blind limitation to colors that they can identify for their increased or decreased temperatures. So a few things about our thermal cameras are they're easy to install. There's no extra tools you need. You're going to mount your cameras just like any other cameras. You're going to then add those cameras to your recorder. You'll specify the channels. And generally with any of our multi-lens cameras, you will need to utilize a network switch, not the integrated PoE switch on the recorder. The reason for that is with a network switch, you can add the same IP address twice, indicating that you have two channels coming from that recorder, something that you cannot do with the internal switch for its plug and play proprietary functionality. Once you have that, you're going to then specify your temperature ranges that you want to be notified of. You can create your areas of interest where you want to monitor that temperature, and then set up your notifications in ICRSS Pro or Smart ICRSS. Now, here's a couple of examples, and we'll discuss this a little bit further after we watch these. But really, one of the most effective uses for this, other than industrial, is going to be for residential, believe it or not. I've got quite a few dealers who utilize this for the capability to see through thick agriculture, landscaping, where you have just a lot of landscaping or agriculture in the scene of the cameras you want to capture, and you may not be able to capture movement at nighttime through all of that, again, agriculture or that trees and bushes, what have you. And this will allow you to capture that movement even when your normal imager can't capture that movement. So it's highly effective for high-end residential as well. Again, I've had a few dealers utilize this on residential installs to be able to monitor those areas of interest. So with your thermal cameras or any other cameras that I see real time, doesn't matter if you're purchasing edge cameras, our budget line of cameras, any of our MX, FX, iPal, or even our thermal cameras, you will have the ability for free layout and design services. This is a free offering by IC Realtime. It gives you the ability to submit a floor plan, submit a Google satellite view. You submit that to us. Your national sales executive will take that and submit it to our solutions engineer. He is then going to take that and create a design layout for you to help you close a bid, or even just to show your end user what they can expect out of their camera system. As you see here, they'll indicate the placements of the cameras, the coverage areas of those cameras, the dory distances of those cameras. If you're not familiar with what a dory distance is, dory stands for detect, observe, recognize, and identify. And these are the distances on screen where you can see this is going to be your identifiable distance. This is going to be your recognizable distance. This is going to be your observational distance. So that's what you get when you get your free design layouts provided by IC Realtime. You're going to get those great coverage areas. It's really going to help your end user or your potential customer understand what they're getting out of their camera system, so you can go ahead and close that bid because your competing dealers may not have this available for the end user. So this is our PTZ, our THIP P2078 FMIR. We're keeping this around. We're discontinuing the bullet. We're looking for a bit of a different bullet, but right now we still have these available. So you have your thermal hybrid IPID. It's not a PTZ. There is no optical zoom. There is some digital zoom, but there is no optical zoom. You have a 7mm and an 8mm fixed lens. So your standard imager being 7mm and your hybrid imager being 8mm. You have your analytics like we discussed, your 256 by 192 VOX sensor, and then your 2 megapixel CMOS sensor. Of course, everything we talked about with your smart alarm and white light and loudspeaker. That's something I forgot to mention. You do have the ability to utilize a loudspeaker for any kind of alerts coming from the camera, your fire detection, and your alarm support, and then your power supply and your monitoring arm included. So now what I'll do is I'll take any questions anyone might have. I do ask if you have any questions, you go to the top of your Zoom meeting, you go to the Q&A tab, not the chat tab, the Q&A tab, and you can drop your questions in there, and I'll be more than happy to answer those questions. So, Lee Schreiber, what is the range to detect your thermal images? So for that bullet there, your distances, bear with me for 1 second. I'm just pulling the specs up here. Apologize, I don't have that off the top of my head here. So your thermal distance is going to be about 164 feet. Next question here. What do you mean with use of different switch to utilize two IP addresses? Good question, Lewis. So whenever you have a dual lens or multi-lens camera, whether you have a single cable run or even in which all of ours have a single cable run with multi-lens, you only have one IP address for the device in total. So to utilize those other lenses, whether it's a dual lens or a quad lens camera, what you're going to do when you're adding that camera is you're going to manually add that. If it's a dual lens, 2 times. So you'll enter in the IP address, the username and password, and you'll add that device, and that'll be channel 1. That'll be the first lens on the camera. You'll then go and you'll manually add, again, using the same IP address, username and password, and you'll add that again, and that the recorder will identify that as the second lens or the second channel, excuse me, for that camera. Now, you can only do that with a network switch. You cannot do that with the internal integrated PoE switch, because that is a proprietary style switch. It's really meant for just adding a single camera at a time. It doesn't really allow you to manual add. Michael, great info. To clarify, is the loudspeaker built into the camera? Yes, it is. The camera does have a loudspeaker built into it. It does. This camera does support OnVIF. Of course, when it comes to OnVIF, OnVIF is a compatibility standard, but it is not a guarantee of compatibility. When I talk about OnVIF with people, I always explain that OnVIF will take you from a 50-50 chance of compatibility to about an 85 to 90% chance of compatibility. So do keep that in mind. OnVIF is not perfect every time, and it's not a guarantee of compatibility. Michael, great question. I have last time I looked about 33 bullets left in stock. I do not have a timeline for the replacement, but I do have about 33 in stock right now. Last time I checked. Um, I haven't heard anything in the pipeline as with an optical zoom. You may want to reach out to your sales executive to see if there's anything in the pipeline. There's nothing that I'm aware of personally. Um, I'm not even sure that you can utilize the thermal imaging with optical zoom. But yeah, I haven't heard anything at this time. All right, well, it looks like no one else has any questions at this time. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us on today's IC Real-Time webinar. Let's see here, Lee. I assume the PTZ can be set on schedule to pan and follow a thermal image. It can track. It can track a thermal image. Yeah, it can, and it can pan. Now, do keep in mind, though, very much like any kind of tracking, when it comes to also having a tour or a pan function, that if the PTZ is in a pan or is in a scan or a tour, then it's not looking at the thermal image at certain times, right? Because it's moving to other locations to look at images. So you do want to keep in mind that if you're watching a specific area of interest for thermal changes, that you use it as a fixed camera, because if something happens while it's looking in another direction on a pan or a scan or a tour, you're not going to capture that temperature change. So it's really kind of something that where you're really going to have to kind of pick what you want out of the camera. All right, looks like the last question. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us on today's IC Real-Time webinar. My name is Michael Caballero. I'm one of the National Sales Executives here at IC Real-Time. Have a fantastic weekend and stay safe.